Hey, friends. Welcome. I'm super excited you guys are here. Today, our focus is a focus that I believe truly is going to get you to your next level. Maybe you find yourself looking to get to a place, but feeling like you're on the hamster wheel, stuck in fear, stuck in doubt, stuck and never feeling like you're truly moving forward. And today, we're talking about why we repeat the same old patterns, but most importantly, how to change them. I want you to hear that today because maybe you found yourself in a season where, like we do at the beginning of every year, we set those goals. We envision the destination of where we want to be, but we find ourselves in the old patterns and wondering why things never change. See, one of my favorite quotes by Albert Einstein, he talks about, he really talks about, doing the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. I want you to hear that today. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And I think that's many times how we live our lives. We find ourselves in patterns, but hoping for better results. We find ourselves in patterns and wondering why we're still operating out of fear. We find ourselves in patterns and wondering why we feel stuck. Because that's what I really want to talk about patterns here. Is it really gives you an opportunity not only to change the trajectory of your life, but change your destination. But most importantly, that real change starts with you. And that's what I really want to focus on today is that realize that you have the power to not only change your patterns, but when you change your patterns, you change your life. So that's exactly why I'm excited for you to be here with me today as we to focus on why we continue to hold on to those same patterns, but most importantly, why we change them. Hey, maybe you're wondering here, Sam, who are you? Hey, my name is Sam. I'm a fitness entrepreneur, certified transformational coach, and co-creator of the 8 Dimensions of Wellness alignment meeting. So, we're talking about love in this spectrum here today. I want to talk about that today. We're talking about love in our patterns, love and changing our lives, but realizing that real change starts not only with us, but starts with changing our patterns. And that's exactly what I'm excited for you to be here today. So yes, we're going to dive on in. So let's put this right here. So like I said, we're talking about our patterns today. We're talking about the patterns that really keep us in here today, And I want you to start thinking about patterns as a loop. Kind of like I talked about there at that beginning, is many times we know the destination where we want to end up, but we find ourselves on the hamster wheel of life, wondering why we're stuck, why we continue the same loop, and how we escape that loop. And I think many times is that I know for myself is I had to ask myself, and I want you to find some reflection on here. This is a workshop. This is a workshop. We're doing the work today. This isn't just me telling you how things are done. This is where I want you to take some introspection into your life and see maybe some of the loops you've been repeating and have just been hoping for change, wishing for change, maybe even dreaming. But today, I really want you to look at the loops in your life. What are those continual circles that you find yourself in, and you keep finding yourself asking, why am I continually finding myself in this situation, in my relationships, in my jobs, in my work? I want you to think about the loops that we find ourselves in lives, and not only how we can interrupt that pattern, but we can find true change. So right here, I really like it says that the architecture of loop, and like I said, we're talking about why, like I said, why you keep repeating the same pattern and how to actually change it. I really want you to hear that today. Have you ever asked yourself why you keep repeating the same pattern? How many of us have asked ourselves that question? Why do I keep finding myself in the same relationship? Why do I keep finding myself in the same position at my job? Why do I keep finding myself stuck, wishing for more, hoping for more, but still in the same pattern? And I I really want you to hear the mindset shift. Because many times we keep saying, why do I keep finding myself here? But I want you to place that word pattern in here. That's a powerful mindset shift. Pattern. Realizing that, hey, it's a pattern. And the best thing I want you to hear this, and this is why I love it being a pattern, is because when it's a pattern, what does that mean? That it can change. I want you to think about, okay, so I'm a big video game nerd. I'm not going to tell you, I'm a video game nerd, but there used to be a left, down, right, up was, if you played Nintendo, left, down, right, up was a combo for every fighting game that would be the best punch combination. If you didn't know any moves, you can push square, yellow, but if you push left, down, right, up was always the strongest power move in any Mortal Kombat. So that was a pattern that set us up for success. So just like that's a pattern that could help you win the game, there are patterns in our lives that can set us up to be successful. But at the end of the day, it's time to change it. If you find yourself in a pattern that you don't like, you have the power to change it. That's if you don't leave with anything else but that, my job is done. So let's get into our first slide. So it says patterns are not proof that something's wrong with you. They're the proof that your mind learned how to survive. And I really love this perspective in this quote because I want you to think as patterns, not of something that I have created for myself, but I realized I had to look at introspection of where does this pattern that I have truly come from? You know, like I was talking about in the beginning of, I want you to start thinking about some of the loops in your lives. But most importantly, when it comes to that introspection, I want you to start looking at the patterns in your life and start asking yourself, where did I get that pattern from? Where did I get that pattern? See, many of us, I had a pattern like this. I had an older brother. Right? So my pattern from an older brother, my parents, they had older siblings as well. So the youngest gets the oldest's clothes. The youngest doesn't get we don't get the new clothes of the youngest, right? We don't get new clothes of the youngest. We get hand-me-downs. So we pass the clothes down. And it's funny because I have two boys of myself, and my oldest is, his build is different than my youngest. My youngest is a little bigger. He's a big boy. He's going to be a big boy. But my oldest, he's a little smaller. So when we try to pass his clothes down, they didn't transfer that well. And I had to ask myself, my younger one needs new clothes because they're just built different. And I asked myself, I kept finding myself wondering why I can't just pass these things down. Why can't we just pass these clothes down? Because obviously the younger one, the older one should be able to pass his clothes down. And I kept forcing something that wasn't working. And how many of us find ourselves in that situation, forcing ourselves into situations, trying to get things to work, but they're just not working? Well, it's funny. And I had to ask myself, where does that pattern come from? Well, when I was a kid, I got all my brothers' hand-me-downs. I never got new clothes. And then I had to really think about, where did I learn that from? I learned that from my parents. They had older siblings and they never got new clothes. They just got the hand-me-down. So I want you to start thinking about that in your life, some of those loops in your lives that we are fighting to protect. But like this says, patterns aren't proof that there's something wrong with you. They're just proof that your mind learned to survive. I want you to think about that. What patterns have you accumulated to your survival? And I want you to think about this kind of like what we're talking about. What we are taught. We are taught that patterns are character flaws, right? We're taught that they solve the brute force and willpower. They solve the brute force and willpower. We're taught that repeat them means you're failing. And shame keeps us small, silent, stuck. That's what I love this quote by Brené Brown. She says, shame keeps us small, silent, and stuck. Isn't that true? Isn't that true how shame tends to shrink you, push you down, and push you in a box that you may feel like you never survive? But I really love this. It says, but I want you to hear what's actually happening here. Patterns are simply survival strategies. They are run by our nervous system's programming. See, you are running off of your nervous system. You've been programmed to react this way. And repeating them means your body is trying to protect you. So if you find yourself wondering, why am I always on this hamster wheel? It's because your body has found comfort in that pattern. But I want you to hear this quote by Eckhart Tolle. He says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Ooh, isn't that powerful? I want to repeat that again to really let that sink in. He says, until you make your unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. I want you to really let that sink in here, because many of us find ourselves in challenging seasons and situations, and we call it fate. Who has done that? Who's done that? Found themselves in a challenging season and said, it just must be me. It must be fate that my life is just destined to go this way. That my life can't be better than this. So we find ourselves repeating them. And then what happens when we repeat them? We find shame. Shame that keeps us small. Shame that keeps us silent. And shame that keeps us stuck. But I want you to hear this today. Until you make your unconscious conscious, it will direct your life. And you'll call it fate. I love that quote by Eckhart Tolle. But the best thing about that is that it simply starts with making the next right choice. So, the anatomy of autopilot. How many of us, that's what I feel like we're all in this world running on autopilot because it's simply our nervous system survival strategies. So you say, why willpower alone cannot break the cycle? I want you to hear that today. Willpower alone cannot break the cycle. And I think many of us are living off of that willpower. We're thinking that if I can push through, or if I had more discipline, or if I was more resilient, I could push through this. But see, I love this. It says the number one trigger, the surface event, right? And then we come into the familiar pain, the pain body, the reactive, the old emotional imprints, right? So we have that emotional imprint. And then we come into that third, that protective action, the survival pattern displayed. And then we go into 4, that temporary relief. The nervous system feels safe again. And then we get 5, that loop reinforcement. The brain learns this works. And that's kind of how those triggers work. We have that crazy situation that happens. We find a familiar pain in that pain. We come into protective action. And then we find a temporary relief. And then that loop continuously goes around. And I really love this quote by Jay Shetty. He says, the brain loves familiarity more than happiness. Even unhealthy dynamics feel predictably safe. Isn't that powerful? That even in a hard situation, now you wonder why people keep going through the same pains, the same challenges, the same setbacks, but it's because that familiarity, even if it's painful, brings us happiness, brings us safety, makes us feel comfortable. And I want you to look at some of the loops you have in your life, some of the triggers, some of those things that you know, this just, you call it, this is just simply how my life will be. But I really love that quote. I want to repeat that quote to really let that sink in. The brain loves familiarity more than happiness. I need you to hear that today, because maybe you're looking for more joy and happiness in your life, but joy and happiness is not something that's familiar for you. So you keep finding yourself back in fear, back in doubt, back in pain, because that's where you feel safe. But I want you to hear this today. Patterns are not random. They're highly specific protective armor. To break the loop, you must find identity, which survival strategies your nervous system prefers. And that's how we really start to break up the patterns, is we have to identify the patterns in our life. See, that's what I really want you to focus on today. This is where the work comes in, is really start to identify the patterns. because they are highly specific and it's a protective armor. See, your pattern is armor. Your pattern is a security blanket. Your pattern, your body finds comfort in. And to break the loop, you must identify which survival strategy your nervous system prefers. I want you to really think about that. What are some of those patterns that I feel so comfortable that I don't think I can change them? But the pattern diagnostic table, I love this table because it really helps us break some things down. See, we're going to talk about the pattern, the abandonment pattern. You know, what is the core thing about the abandonment pattern? It's fear of rejection. It's a belief that you're unworthy, right? So what is our autopilot behavior when it comes to the abandonment pattern? It comes down to people pleasing, leaving yourself to take care of others, or just to keep the peace. How many of us have found ourselves in that people pleasing way? That's just simply an abandonment pattern. That's that fear of rejection, a belief that you are unworthy. And our body has found an autopilot to always abandon ourselves to keep the peace. And this is the consequences. And that's what I want you to hear this. We have self-loss, mistaking self-sacrifice for confidence. So we find ourselves giving of ourselves till we have no more. And that's the confidence. We lose ourselves to gain others' approval. And then I want to talk about the avoidance pattern, which each one of us are going to find ourselves in one of our areas of our lives having one of these patterns, the avoidance pattern. What is that basis of an avoidance pattern? It's fear of suffering. It's an intolerance of discomfort. And our autopilot behavior there is numbing out, scrolling, distracting, escaping instead of feeling. How many of us have found ourselves like that? Just scrolling to fill the time, escaping, keeping ourselves busy just so we don't have to feel. But here's the consequence of that. It suppresses our stress. And that stress gets stored up in our bodies, increasing the very suffering we're trying to avoid. So we find ourselves in that loop of fear, and that loop of intolerance, and that loop of discomfort. And then I want to talk about the repetition pattern. Fear of the unfamiliar. And I want you to think about that autopilot behavior. We find ourselves in dating the same toxic personality, seeking out the same rational stress. And then what's the consequence of that? It's consistent loops, the same lesson appearing, and if the truth interrupts the illusion. So I want you to think about the patterns that you have here in your life. What pattern have you found yourself in? Because each of us have this in any area of our life. And like I said, if you can get highly specific, we can start to break the loop. And the cost of armor. I want you to hear this today. The cost of armor. When we build our emotional armor to protect ourselves from pain, we seal ourselves off from life. I need you to hear that again. This is the cost of having that armor up. We think that armor is keeping us safe, but that armor is actually keeping us up. And it says, when we build our emotional armor to protect ourselves from pain, we seal ourselves off from life. And I really love this quote by Brené Brown. She says, we cannot selectively numb our emotions. When we numb the painful emotions, we also numb the positive ones. Isn't that a hard truth? That the very thing we're trying to protect ourselves from is protecting us from the very joy we're seeking. And I really love this analogy. It says the emotions versus armor vigilation. See, the pain comes in and we're trying to react to pain. But the cost of us keeping up that armor is light and joy and connection can't get in either. But I really love this quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, the seed of suffering in you, the seed of suffering in the may, strong in you, may strong. But you don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. I'm going to repeat that again to really let that sink in. The seed of suffering in you, the seed of suffering in you may strong. But don't wait until you have no more suffering before allowing yourself to be happy. And how many of us have found ourselves in seasons like that, where we got to wait for the storm to pass before we can allow love in our lives? We can wait for the storm to pass for allowing joy into our lives. Wait for the storm to pass for us to start taking control of our destiny. Waiting for things to get better. But realizing that we can't selectively numb our emotions. And when we numb out the painful emotions, we also numb out the positive ones. So it's time to let down your armor and ride through the storm, allowing it to pass. Because as it passes, so do you allow joy in. And I want you to hear this. Life simply reflects your internal beliefs. I need you to really let that sink in. See, your internal beliefs matter. Life simply is a reflection of what you internally believe. See, I love how this is. When those internal triggers apply pressure, conditioned beliefs flows out. So when life puts pressure on you, your beliefs are what flow out. Your beliefs are what we react to, or your reactions for the world. And I love this analogy by Wayne Dyer. When we talked about, it says, when you squeeze an orange, what comes out is what's inside. And when life squeezes you with a trigger, what comes out of you is your conditioned belief. I need you to hear that again. When life squeezes you with that trigger, that pain, that fear, that doubt, what comes out of you has been your conditioned belief. See, if we don't have joy, if we don't have love, if we don't have peace inside, when we get squeezed, that can't come out. But I really love this quote by Wayne Dyer. He says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. I need you to let that sink in. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Life is simply just a reflection of your internal beliefs. So we're going to talk about this space between is where we can truly change our lives, right? We had that trigger and we had that autopilot reaction, but we need to take control of that space in between that trigger and that autopilot reaction. And that is where we have the power. Is that awareness and choice? See, we have the power to control what comes out because we can take control of what happens between the trigger and our autopilot. And many of us have those two things together with no space in between. But I want you to hear this. Says transformation doesn't happen by fighting the pattern. It happens by expanding the microcores between the trigger and the reaction. Awareness creates the gap. Choice happens inside of it. And that's why today we want to talk about identifying our patterns, because when we identify our patterns, that gives us awareness. And when we have an awareness, we're able to make the choice and build that gap in between. Because when we know what triggers us and we know how our autopilot reaction is, we can step in between with awareness and make that choice is what happens on the inside, in between. So step one, see it, observe the pattern without judgment to weaken its hold. I need you to hear that today. It's time to observe our patterns. Maybe there's so many patterns in our lives that we don't even want to look at them because we know the end result. But today, step one is to see that pattern. Observe the pattern. without judgment. Because when you go with it without judgment, to weaken its hold. And the action is notice the trigger, name the pattern out loud, and ask yourself, when did I first learn this? I want you to hear that today. See, patterns are programming. We have been programmed to react that way by our environment, by our family, by our surroundings. So I want you to start asking yourself that question. Step one, now that we've observed our patterns, we're going to notice the triggers. And it's time to name it out loud. Maybe it's fear. And ask yourself, when did I first learn this fear? And I really love this quote by Eckhart Tolle. It says, awareness is the greatest agent of change. I need you to hear that today. Awareness is the greatest agent of change. Maybe you find yourself looking to change your life. And it all starts with having awareness of the patterns. If you're really looking to change your life, change starts with awareness. Now we're going to go into step two. It's time to feel that emotion. Emotions are signals from our body. The pain insists upon being attended to. Think about that aches in your arm, that sore shoulder, that tight back. I want you to start being aware of where we're feeling this stuff. And the action here is to stop fighting the discomfort. Breathe with the emotion. Notice exactly what happens in your nervous system when the loop activates. So now we feel that pain. You should breathe. Took it in. Notice exactly what happens in your nervous system when that loop gets activated. So now that we've named the emotion, reduces its intensity, setting with removing its power. That's the power. When we name the emotion, its intensity is removed, therefore giving us the power to name it and claim it and change it. And step three, it's the time to choose differently. Interrupt the loop with one small, unfamiliar action. I want you to hear that today. It's time to interrupt the loop. One small, unfamiliar action at a time. See, instead of abandoning, instead of the self-abandonment, the people-pleasing, don't say, yes, I can do that. Pause, take that breath in between your normal reaction, and say, let me think about that and get back to you. Instead of the avoidance, the numbing, the scrolling, the keeping ourselves busy, trying not to feel, don't reach for your phone and scroll. Take action. Sit in complete silence with the uncomfortable emotion for exactly 2 minutes. Just really sit with that emotion. Let your nervous system calm down. Give it that name and take your power back. And instead of repeating the same old familiar stress, don't follow the immediate pull of the familiar. Just ask, what would a fully healed version of me choose right now? Isn't that powerful? I want you to think about that. What would a fully healed version of me choose right now? I want you to think about that. So I love that. This is how we continue to break the loops. It's taking that small, unfamiliar action. It's when that self-abandonment comes down, taking that pause and that nice breath and saying, let me think about that and I'll get back to you. Not feeling rushed for acceptance. Instead of the avoidance, that numbing, that keeping myself busy, instead of feeling, sit in complete silence. Give yourself that place to truly feel how your nervous system is for exactly 2 minutes. And then react from there. And instead of being rushed into the same old familiar pattern and stress, ask, what would a fully healed version of myself with? And that's just simply that question of awareness that breaks the pattern. See, it's the small, consistent actions change your identity. You cannot change your past, but you can change your interpretation of it. Every time you pause, feel, and choose differently, you rewrite that deep programming of your nervous system. You see, courage is choosing growth even when it feels terrifyingly unfamiliar. But I really want you to hear this today. I think many times we're trying to change our patterns by moving the mountain, by some grand display. Like you're saying, if things are going to change, there's going to have to be a show. But I want you to hear this today. It's that small, consistent actions that truly change our identity. You know, you maybe heard it. How do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's exactly how we change our identities. It's by taking those consistent steps. Yes, it's going to demand courage. Yes, you're going to have to start choosing growth. Yes, it's going to be terrifying. But it's time to be brave. It's time to be bold. But most importantly, it's time to choose differently. Because survival patterns aren't always the patterns that create peace. Change does not start with force. It starts with awareness. See the pattern, feel the pattern, and choose differently. That one moment begins a new story. I need you to hear that again to really let that sink in. See the pattern, feel the pattern, and choose differently. That's all it takes. Because that one moment begins your new story. So, breaking the deep nervous system programming is hard to do alone. You have the map, but the terrain is tough. If you're ready for a deep work, I have 2 coaching spots left. We will map your specific survival loops and walk you through the gap together. So if you're interested in having a deep dive on identifying your patterns and we can break the loops together, DM me patterns to claim your free spot. But I want you to hear that today, that you have the power to change the loop. But most importantly, you have the power to step into your destiny. But it starts with stepping outside of your comfort zone. It starts with stepping outside of change. But it starts with a belief in you. I need you to hear that today. It really comes down to you. So shoot down that comment section. Share this with somebody that needs to hear this. But DM me patterns. DM me patterns. Let's work together. You don't have to do this journey alone. We can do this together. And I'll guide you one step of the way. I have 2 coaching spots open. And we're going to give you a custom plan. This isn't a cookie cutter program. This is built off of your patterns so you can move you through your patterns and you can step into your destiny with confidence, with clarity, but most importantly, interrupting the loop. But I need you to hear this today, that you have the power to change your life by taking action one step at a time. I'm super thankful you guys are here. So make sure you reach out to me for coaching. Shoot down in the comment section something you've learned. DM me if you have any questions. But most importantly, realize that change starts with breaking your patterns. But most importantly, that change starts with you. Take care.